So we're beginning our journey in how to attack against a long-castled king with a very instructive grandmaster fight that happened between Shahram Medyarov and Nigel Short in the Dresden Olympiad in 2008. So the reason why I selected this game really is because it has a lot of these key elements that can make an attack against a long-castled king very successful. And this is the reason why I wanted to begin with it, so you can understand how many important and yet little things can make an attack like this very successful. So I would recommend you to actually flip the board right now to get black's pieces, because it was black who won this game, and I'm going to do it with a Control F on my keyboard. You can right click on the board and choose flip board to get black. So the game started with d4, black played e6, knight f3, knight to f6, pawn to c4, and what we have now is d5. So this is basically the general way of playing the system. So one of the things I like to say is that anyone who plays the Queen's Gambit Decline will say it's hard to see an attack on opposite castled kings. However, on quite a few occasions, white may choose to bring out his knight on c3, set the bishop out on a square like f4 or g5, and prepare to move his queen away so he can actually castle long. Now, this is not too safe because there are quite a few different ways on how black can attack against the white king out there. However, this is possibly going to happen, and when that happens, we'd like to know exactly how to attack. Now, pretty much after the move of d5, knight c3, bishop to e7, and then there was the move of bishop to g5, white actually completed his development. He got his pieces out, and now he's ready to proceed with his development. Okay, so after bishop g5, of course, there is a very important question, and this is, what is black going to do? And I think that there are quite a few different lines here, but the h6 line, the h6 variation, is quite interesting. I think this is the Tartakova variation, commonly chosen on any level. Anatoly Karpov used to play that with a great success as black in some of his early years, and basically many grandmasters have adopted it. I think it's a solid line. And actually, white played bishop takes f6 here, avoiding eventually the simple line with bishop h4, castles, and actually this was Nigel Short's favorite variation in the Tartakova, when white plays with e3 and then b6. Black gets a pretty comfortable game because of bishop d7, knight d7, and possibly the e4 square that he's able to control. So white's idea is to exchange that knight, and after bishop takes f6, he plays e3, castles, and queen b3. And now you get to realize a little bit of why did white actually exchange out there, you know. So it actually does make quite some good sense here. The trade that white has made on the f6 was purposeful, and what it did was to ultimately weaken the black center. And that's a very, very important thing, because, you know, with this bishop out of the way, so that it doesn't really have the support towards the middle like the d5 and others, then there could be certain problems. Like now black has to defend here, or exchange it, but actually if he exchanges, then white will be ready to recapture on c4, and then we realize that white's going to have a pretty comfortable position, maybe even consider castling on the short side or something like that. So it is a pretty good way of playing. Now, there's only one thing that is not so good about this queen to b3, and just the whole bishop takes f6, and that's the fact that white lost the bishop pair. And for this reason, after queen to b3 and then move of d6 to the c4, we get to realize that black has just one goal: to quickly open up the position and become very successful in the upcoming lines. Like, for example, if white plays bishop takes c4 right now, black is definitely going for the move of c5, let's say, d6 to the c5. There could be knight d7. And we see more than enough then that black will either take the pawn back, actually c6 and b6 to the c, so I have to admit that I much more like the bishop pair here as opposed to that pawn, which is easily protected. Or eventually, if white tries to defend it, there is a move like queen to c7, maybe b4, and there could be a5, so it would be pretty difficult for white to hold his structure on the queen side. So essentially that's the reason why, in fact, black doesn't worry too much about what's happening. And so after d takes to the c4, white decided to capture back with the queen in order to cover the c5 square and eventually prevent a potential c7 to c5 as a move. So black plays b6 as usual, preparing the nice fianchetto of the bishop, long side castles, bishop to b7. And what we realize is just that, in the opening, no matter what kind of targets we may have, it's really better that we don't jump for a quick attack like this. If we just get to jump or attack, it will turn out a little unsuccessful because we don't have the preparation, we're not ready. So as you can see, black is really adding up the pieces that he needs. And when he's ready, after bishop to the d3, he can either play knight d7, actually that's the logical move with rook c8 and c5, or as in this game, in fact, something else happened. Black played the immediate c5. And it's a far-sighted sacrifice. I like to say that. It's just this move immediately opens up the bishops, and specifically that dark square bishop, which can play on the diagonal. But the most important is that it starts a battle. The c5 move really begins the fight. And that's one of the key things that you need to remember when you are attacking a long castle king. It's all about the initiative, really. If you're able to open up faster and start with your threats and with your initiative, then essentially you will really speed up your activity, your attack, and you can do a lot with this. This is the reason why black plays c5 now, knowing that after white takes with d takes to the c5, and then black plays queen e7, he has a lot of power to add. Like, he can play moves like rook to c8, he can attack that pawn, he can bring out the rest of the pieces. It's beautiful. Like, for instance, after c takes to the b, we have rook c8 coming up next, and actually black even has the ability to capture. You can get 2 rooks opened. This is amazing. Yeah, it was. So white suddenly realized that his opening was really not that good as he hoped for. In fact, black is getting some huge possibilities to open up the position. And those 2 bishops are going to be monstrous. So people often wonder, okay, Valerie, when you advance the pawns and you're attacking a king, when you advance the pawns, do you do that so that you exchange the pawns, or you want to just sacrifice and get rid of the pawns themselves? I mean, we're talking about our pawns. Well, actually, you do it for both. You really don't care about so much whether it will be your pawns exchange or your pawns sacrifice. Well, okay, if you can exchange them, certainly we're not going to lose material. But the most important of all is that we get the files open. Through those files, we'll be able to create threats. And when we create the threats, we can get the initiative, like the sequence of forcing moves in a row that won't let the opponent to just go and develop quickly. And that's the reason for the move of queen e7. Now we realize that if white plays c takes to b6, rook c8, he's in trouble. And so Mameyarov actually tried to develop some activity with the move of knight e4 that goes after that dark squared bishop and at the same time protects c5. Smart move. But it didn't stop black from doing what he wanted to do with every single move from the beginning. And that's to complete his development. Knight bd7 gets the knight out and connects the rooks, which is perfect. White brought his bishop down to c2. And I have to say that taking on f6 wouldn't have really changed that much. I want to show that move. This move looks like a very good continuation, but after queen takes f6, or knight takes f6 actually even, in my opinion, white can take with the pawn or pushing it, how black to take and play rook c8. And if he just moves the king away, he's far behind in his whole plan. See, white needed to have moves like g4, h4, and all of that, so that those pawns can move, get to g5, exchange, and maybe black could weaken the white could weaken the black king. And he hasn't done any of these. At the same time, black's ready to play rook takes c5, bring the other rook up, and you realize that that bishop from b7 is actually pressuring the white knight on f3, which makes it very difficult for the pawn from g2 to push. And now we get to understand, we really get to realize where the whole problem comes from. So white didn't even take that bishop. He knew he could, by this way neutralizing the bishop pair, but that wouldn't have helped his attack to work better. So he played bishop c2, hoping that maybe this move is going to help him to cover and protect his king. Of course, black played consistently. Now, really, attacking against any king, whether it's opposite or same castle, really has one feature, and this is speed. So you really have to stay consistent to what you've started. Like if you started an attack, let's say on the queen side, you got to stay consistent up to it. This is the reason why rook fc8 works so well. And we see that black is a threat right now. For example, if white chooses to continue with a move like queen to d3, maybe, like, actually that's probably the reason why white moved the bishop down. Black's going to exchange, takes, block the battery, and we realize that if that pawn falls, then this knight and that bishop, plus that rook, they will be killing. This is something else that I'm going to cover later on this DVD, and that's the concentration of pieces you may have. When that happens, maybe white can exchange, but then after knight takes to b6, you realize that this pawn really doesn't matter. The black's knight is coming on the c4, and maybe even the queen can go to b4. Just like while white is still trying to get any pieces around the king side, black already has threats like knight c4 and so on. So this is completely unstoppable. White couldn't really do it, so he played for knight d6, hoping to counter. He already slowed down his attack a lot, and yet after rook takes c5, queen d3, black uses one of the elements that are most relevant when we actually attack on the opposite side, and that's called stabilization. At one point you just need to stop, pause, and ask yourself, really, what do I need here? What do I have to do? And the move that black just needs to do is knight f8, because when that move happens, h7 or any attacks on the king's side are prevented. And while that knight is out there, it will be practically impossible for white to achieve anything. Bishop d5 is a serious threat now. Knight may be trapped. So white exchanged it, hoping that this will help him to simplify, like exchange more pieces and block black's upcoming threats. And that, though, didn't work. The rook was in c8. White played rook d2. And now black played one of the most important moves. Yes, it is good to centralize pieces, but you need to do something else too. Now, what you can do is actually pause this video and try to think about that. What is black supposed to do here so that he can really advance and move through so that he can attack against white's king? I think the most important move to be made is certainly pawn to a5. It looks like as though white has sort of made the defense on the queen side, but the one thing he can't stop are the pawns. And right now, black is going to use the pawns to break whatever is remaining and staying close to white's king, so that he does not have a way to stop black's concentrated forces. The three major pieces are adding pressure on c2. The bishop is in there attacking b2, and now the pawn is coming with the idea to advance and really weaken the dark squares. That's a really good move. The bishop can't take because of rook c1 checkmate, and we realize that the only thing white can do is a3 to block it. But now black introduces the other pawn. Yes, he does. Pawn a5 is amazing. The pawn is moving, and actually after b5, f4, white finds the time to finally push the pawns and try to get them against black's king, but that doesn't help, because as I said before, we really don't care so much about the pawns. We care about the open lines. The sacrifice is taking place, but then we see that this pawn is going to fall. The good news, though, is not so much that the pawn will fall back. It's about the b line and the pressure on b2 that's going to be completely destructive. White advanced the pawn, and black moved his own. So actually, it looks like white is in a very difficult position. So he was so frustrated that Mediator at that point resigned. And it looks like a premature resignation, perhaps, but in reality, you see that if white does b3, we've got rook takes d4, pawn takes d4, and queen c3 with an inevitable checkmate. If white plays something like supposedly queen d3, there will be the take, and then black's queen can come out through a5. So it will be just some amazing threats if that pawn falls. And even if white decides to exchange on his own, or to take that pawn on his own, he's still in a bad position because the queen's coming, the main defender gets out, and then we see that c2 is hanging, b5 is hanging, so white's losing. It's an incredible example, I think, by Nigel Short, which shows very well that some of the critical elements of making an attack is really about getting the right piece power, then making sure we can open new files, and always stay consistent. You have to react and defend on the opponent's attack only in case he has some damaging threats to be made. If you see how he can damage your position, sure, okay, then you have to stabilize with a move like knight f8. But in any other occasion, just stay consistent, move more pieces, and push the pawns. It was an incredible example that shows exactly how one should attack against a long-castled king.